Pressure doesn't build character, it reveals it. Like when you start to get squeezed in very uncomfortable situations, it reveals who you're going to be. I'm going to get squeezed. And whatever pressure is applied to me, my true character is going to come out, especially when I start to become very uncomfortable. So, me as a leader, I have to be able to look at the relationship between leadership and management inside of an organization. Now, here are some common classical distinctions or either definitions of what a leader and a manager is. You see, a manager controls and a leader inspires. A manager thinks short term and a leader thinks long term. And the common problem with these distinctions is that it states that leader equals vision without execution and management equals execution without vision. But when we start applying these things in real world situations, when we get out of the comfortable classroom environment and we're talking about being in military organizations, government organizations, private organizations, mom and pop stores, when we talk about your intrapersonal life, because believe it or not, you are a leader and a manager of you. Just like I am a leader of who I am and a manager of the resources and the systems that I have installed, that my habits that I do on a daily basis. Vision without execution is simply hallucination. You're daydreaming and you're doing nothing. You're talking about these good ideas, but you never execute on them. And execution without vision is stagnation. You're simply going in circles and you're going around and around chasing your tail. And 5 years down the road, you're doing the same thing, getting the same results. There's an old folk saying out there that talks about pressure builds character. No, it doesn't. Pressure is the test and it reveals the character of who you say you are because you cannot pass a test. You cannot pass a life test because life is the test. And there are lessons inside of your past. You can't pass that test if you have never studied for it. You can't diagnose what you can't see, and you can't see what you haven't studied. It's simple. Invert your thinking. And we're talking about, do you have a positive or a negative organizational climate based upon the rules of the game inside of your organization, the governance? It's that simple because as a leader, you have the foresight to be able to say, I need these rules and governance. That's why whatever organization or other company that you work for, the founders of that organization implemented those systems so that it can dictate the organization's behavior so that it can provide the service and the product that it intended to do. But somehow, some way along the way, people forget that there are rules to the game inside of the organization, and they come in with their own ways of how they see things and how they want to do things, and there's always a conflict. Now, here's a problem. There's a thing called organizational citizenship behavior, which are voluntary behaviors projected towards individuals, stakeholders inside of the organization, and the organization itself. Those are the behaviors that you want. Those are the entrepreneurial behaviors, the creative ideas inside of the organization, those helping behaviors. Now, the opposite side of that is what they call counterproductive workplace behaviors. Those are also voluntary. Those are negative behaviors that literally disrupt the service and the product production of the organization. You see, tolerance of counterproductive workplace behavior, it's voluntary. And leaders who tolerate counterproductive workplace behaviors are literally voluntarily hurting their own organization. So every day when you go into work and you're going to be tested this, you have to test character against behavior and you have to find out, is there an alignment? Are individuals just simply running at the mouth and just saying, hey, We need to implement the rules of the game, and this is the standard. And then you turn around and you look at them, and they are exhibiting counterproductive workplace behaviors. The army, or either the military, the army itself, they have these things called sexual assault review boards, and they go in. I know at the installation I was at, they would bring in all the senior leaders into one conference room, and they would sit down and they would do a case review with the prevention program. And these are individuals in there, they're literally diligently working to solve the organization's problem, the installation's problem at Fort Hood. And time again, I would be walking down the hallway and I would see individuals coming out of these meetings. And I remember one time there was this one brigade commander, and he had an entourage of individuals around him. And literally, he just went and stuck a big old dip inside of his mouth, inside of the building. Now, a lot of individuals out there, they will say there's nothing wrong with that. But there truly is something wrong with it, because every government building is a tobacco-free facility. You cannot use any smokeless products. You cannot vape, and you cannot smoke cigarettes inside of a government building. That is simply a counterproductive behavior. So, in this individual's particular case, there was a misalignment in between their behavior and what they said that they would do. So, now we get into the leadership framework that I use: know, be, and do. You see, leaders, they understand the policies, they understand the ethics, they understand the standards, they understand the consequences for a violation of the rules by exhibiting counterproductive workplace behaviors. They understand that counterproductive workplace behaviors harms operations, spreads socially, it spreads like wildfire, it destroys morale, it violates organizational governance, the standards, and it undermines the psychological contracts that they said that they would uphold. So we truly understand that knowledge is not an issue. Specifically, when you start looking at individuals with their position, their time and grade, their education behind it, their age themselves, we don't have to teach individuals new things. We just simply have to remind them of what they already know and what they said that they were going to do. Because this is where the B comes in. All right. The person who you said you were going to be, that identity and character, and the moral courage component. Remember, moral courage relies upon moral agency, telling the difference between right and wrong, and moving forth into adversity, knowing that you're going to get some type of pushback. And this is where the majority of leaders fail. Because leaders who tolerate counterproductive workplace behaviors, they're conflict avoidant, they are needy, they depend upon extrinsic motivation or either approval dependent. They're constantly protecting their ego. And this is what gets me. They're protecting other individuals' egos too. They're morally undeveloped. And what I mean by morally undeveloped is that they really cannot discern the difference between what's right and what's wrong, because they have been exhibiting these counterproductive behaviors for so long that they are morally blind to what is actually the objective truth based upon governance, based upon the rules inside of the game. They're psychologically fragile. When you challenge them and say, hey, this isn't right, they get upset and they get angry and they want to retaliate against individuals. I know I'm speaking off of personal experience of what I've seen working in the workforce, working in the Department of Defense, and working in the civilian agency, in the private sector, and also talking to others and conducting research. It's out there. You're dealing with psychologically fragile individuals and the unwillingness to take risk. Some of these individuals are just risk adverse. Now, I want to talk to you about all these variables right here. A lot of these variables have to do with past related things that have happened to an individual, whether they're trauma related, PTSD related, whatever it is. The research supports that. I was a fortunate individual to go through drill sergeant school 17 weeks. And what I mean by that is drill sergeant school, when I went through, was 9 weeks long. I attended drill sergeant school at Fort Benning, Georgia, for 17 weeks. The very first time I got released because I came down with a heat injury. It was a real bad heat injury, and they sent me home. And I looked at the commandant square in his face when I had to go see him, and he was making a judgment on whether I would stay or whatnot. And he says, "I'll see you in January." And I was like, "Hey, Sergeant Major, I can be in place as an insert in the next class." He said, "I'll see you in January." He actually did me a good thing because I was really, really sick and I needed that time to recover. When I went back to drill sergeant school and I started on day 0, it wasn't a new thing to me. So now I was able to absorb the true experience because I already knew the rules of the game. I watched individuals who came in to that academy, and I literally watched some individuals who were totally conflict avoidant. They wouldn't take any risk. They were psychologically fragile, and they were literally dependent upon extrinsic motivation. By the end of school, they were monsters. They were self sustaining, sovereign individuals who literally would not compromise their integrity, and they would hold other individuals accountable. So, what I learned was with the proper social support system, leaders can learn with the appropriate knowledge how to become an ethical leader. Because most leaders who tolerate counterproductive workplace behaviors, they're not malicious, they're not bad individuals. But yet and still, there are those individuals out there that are monsters. They are not good people. A lot of these individuals are just, they're not appropriately equipped with the knowledge and the skills and the support systems to properly intervene when things go bad inside of an organization. So now we roll into the do. Now, all eyes are on you. This is the execution layer. This is the intervention layer. This is the accountability layer. This is where you start making corrections and adjusting the organizational behavior so that it's in alignment through your modeling behavior. Now, I had said in a previous week that organizational citizenship behavior is influenced by 58% of a model of ethical leaders exhibiting behaviors that are aligned with organization governance. Literally, leaders who know and follow the rules and exhibit modeling behaviors can highly influence organizational citizenship behaviors. That's the opposite of counterproductive behaviors inside of the workplace. And that's what you want. Because when B is weak, the do always collapses. Because you don't have the self-efficacy saying that I can do this. And you're always going to revert back to what the subjective norm is of the organization, specifically if that subjective norm is exhibiting counterproductive workplace behaviors. So even though the leader knows what the right thing is, they won't do it. They will literally see these counterproductive behaviors going on, and they won't intervene, they won't stop it, they won't speak up due to either fear or cowardice, which is there is a distinct correlation between those two variables right there, because fear, it's an internal threat response to an environment stimulus, and cowardice, that's a choice not to get engaged in something that's uncomfortable. We talk about pluralistic ignorance, which amplifies avoidance. You know what right looks like, but you're seeing wrong, and just because the collective group around you is staying silent and not doing anything, You're like, hey, I'm just going to go along to get along. And then you just remain silent and you just look the other way. You are getting what you tolerate, and you are now participating in those counterproductive workplace behaviors. We talk about leadership avoidance, which triggers a cascade, it's a domino effect of those counterproductive behaviors. And now you have set a new standard inside of your organization. Leaders who avoid that responsibility, they undermine the social contract, that employer-employee contract that you said that you would uphold. And that right there compromises your integrity. But part of the antidote to managing and eliminating those counterproductive workplace behaviors is moral agency, moral courage, and being a sovereign individual. That means being a sovereign individual, you are totally in control of what you do, how you think, and you're least likely to be influenced by external variables or external stimulus. There's always a chance that you might be moved to the left or either to the right, depending on your mindset. But if you consciously saying, hey, I'm not going to the left or to the right, you are counteract cowardice. You will make the choice to engage. So, how do we build that moral agency and that moral courage to intervene in things that are just not good? How do we become that sovereign individual? You do it in the quiet. You build your personal character in the quiet. And you make these logical, rational, pro-social choices to exhibit these behaviors when there's no audience. And when no one's looking, you always hold the standard. You set very high standards, you meet and maintain those standards, and you're always pushing those standards higher. And it's not easy because that is a lot of pressure that you're putting on yourself. And you understand the consequences of doing the right thing, and you understand the consequences of doing the wrong thing. And you have to hold yourself accountable to those consequences. Don't look for anybody else to say, hey, you did a good thing or either you did a bad thing. You hold yourself accountable to that. I know going throughout my education journey and throughout my military journey, whenever I would make a mistake, I would tell people, don't waste your breath on me. Please don't waste your breath yelling at me. I've yelled at myself enough and I have gotten down on myself enough for making this error in judgment. You are just simply going to waste your time. And leaders would simply leave me alone because they were like, dude's just a little bit different. And not everybody's like that. I am. And it has to do with my upbringing, and that's perfectly fine. However, that's what worked for me, and you have to be able to find something that works for you. And if you have to go find you a mentor that's going to hold you accountable to those consequences in a positive manner to help you grow, then that's what you need to do. And so we talk about building the discipline and the practice when no one's watching. We're talking about day in and day out to where it becomes you. It just becomes a habit of the building, and that's who you are and what you do. And it's a building process, and you're just stacking bricks on top of bricks, wins on top of wins, because everything that you do right, that's a win, and you need to celebrate that. And you can only do that by studying the know. You have to be able to have the knowledge. Then you have to apply that knowledge through practice. Then you have to deconstruct it and say, what went right? What went wrong? How can I become more efficient and more effective? And then you do it again. You rinse and repeat, you rinse and repeat, and you do it again and again and again. Because one day, you're going to get tested, and a crisis is going to happen inside of your life. And that pressure is going to squeeze you, and your true character is going to come out. And when that pressure hits you, you've got to be able to step up to your game, because if you don't have it, you can't go get it right there in that moment. And I'll give you an example. Now, what I've done is I've attached a link in the description of a hour-long video that I made about a situation that I went through for the last 8 years. And I'll give you a snippet of what we're talking about. Is there an alignment between an individual's character and their behavior? And you have to test it. I was sitting in an office with the Corps Chief of Staff who's a full bird colonel, a retired full bird colonel who's the Deputy Chief of Staff, and then I've got a lawyer in there. And I explained to them a situation on how they were just factually, objectively wrong in their analysis of a case that was brought against me. And I told them and I showed them factual evidence that a commander had cleared me of an investigation. And then I explained to them, I said, the battalion executive officer, who was not under assumption of command authority, signed off on the findings of the investigation during the appeal process, so that meant the investigation was ongoing, never told me about the appeal, that executive officer was wrong. And after the appeal, new evidence came out and the commander unsubstantiated the investigation. And they said that they were in the right, saying that it was substantiated. I said, no, you weren't, because that XO can't sign off on it. And they were going off of what the XO signed off on. And then the lawyer looked at me square in the face and he said, the XO didn't need to be on assumption of command orders. And I'm like, where'd you get that information, dude? And he looked at me. He was like, it's in there. I said, name the regulation. And if you go inside that video, I provide where all the information is. And that lawyer went blank. I looked at the chief of staff and he simply looked at me and said, I don't know how to fix this. And then I looked at the deputy chief of staff and his jaw just dropped. And I said, oh, y'all are wrong and y'all are making a big mistake. They went back about a year later and went and briefed Congress and the Fifth Circuit of Appeal that it was substantiated. This is what I'm talking about. Counterproductive workplace behavior is volunteer. These individuals knew better, but they didn't do better. Because I tell you, if they were disciplined on the knowledge, when that pressure hit, the discipline would have showed up and they would have done the right thing. But because they have a habit of escaping tough situations and escaping and avoiding conflictive situations, that's what happened when they all clammed up inside that meeting. Now, I'm just a lonely civilian employee. They all clammed up. I've got a 06, I've got a lawyer, and then I've got a retired 06 who used to be an IG. They all know the rules of the game, and they knew I was right. This is why I teach the know before the do. Now, you still may lose that fight, but inside your head, you won, and they know you won, because you cannot pressure test what was never built. I just pressure tested, and it failed miserably. And right now, what you have to do is you have to start building your knowledge foundation every single day. Read, write, think, listen to scholars, listen to subject matter experts, test the validity and the reliability of the information that's being presented to you. You have to do that, because this is where championship mindsets are made. This is where they're built, and you construct them, because ignorance is not bliss. So we're going to close this out, and I ask you right now, what are you building? What are you building at this current moment? Because ignorance through avoidance or either knowledge through engagement is what you're building. Now, either one of those two, tell me in the comments what you're building right now. Building you and your intrapersonal life. You, how are you leading and managing your life? And if you don't want to drop it in the comments, you know where to reach me at www.irbyethicalstrategies.com. Reach out to me, send me an email, and let me know. We'll chat about it. And follow along on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Monday's the know, Wednesday's the be, Friday's execution the do. I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.